So, okay. So I was elaborating this list of heavier baryons. Okay, this list of heavier baryons. Now lambda, sigma, chi. So this is the list at lambda, sigma, chi. So these are the observed particles. So the new part, this is a symbol for a new particle. It is its mass, which is determined experimentally. So these are new states other than the known particles which are found, and these are the lifetime. These are the lifetime of these particles. Okay. So, so just a minute. So we see that these particles, if you look at this list, you can check that. So this is the list that sigma lambda is 1 0. This sigma here, there are 3 different particles whose masses are accidentally or for some reason comes to be very close to each other. This 1189 MeV, 1193 MeV, 1197 MeV. So one is charged, positively charged, one is 0, other is negatively charged. So I denote by just noting that they have the nearly equal masses. So I denote all these 3 particles by the same symbol, sigma. Just their different charges are given by plus, 0 and minus. And please note that sigma plus and sigma minus are not particles and antiparticles. They are just different particles because their masses are different. Clear? So this is a, similarly, there is a particle, there are 2 particles found in nature which have this amount of masses, which are also very close, 1350 MeV and 1322 MeV. One is charged and one is neutral and other is negatively charged, and they found to decay in these channels, and we call them by the same sigma chi. Chi 0, chi plus. So in short, when I write heavier baryons, I just use these symbols, but this means lambda 0, sigma means the different charged versions, chi means the different charged versions. There is no particle found in nature which has a mass, which has a charge positive and has a mass very close to this value. So there is no chi plus symbol here. Okay. And every particle here, for every particle, there is a corresponding antiparticle, okay, which is not listed in this table A. I list only the particles. So lambda plus has its own antiparticle, and that can't be denoted by lambda minus because I use that symbol to denote another particle of negative charge having nearly equal mass to that sigma. Yeah. So sigma plus and sigma minus are truly not particle antiparticle. They're just different particles, but they have their own set of antiparticles, all particles. Okay. So I will gradually come to that. But just these are newly observed particles. See that from the baryon number assignment we have made so far, we have, if you look at the last day's table, proton and neutron are assigned baryon number +1, while all other particles discussed so far up to previous class had baryon number 0. Only P and N were of non-zero baryon number, and we discussed lambda 0 in last class also. It is a positive baryon number 1 that we can see from this reaction only, because all this reaction happened, baryon number has to be conserved. So if from here you can check that if proton has a baryon number 1 or neutron has a baryon number 1, pions have 0 baryon numbers. So for baryon number conservation, we require lambda to have baryon number 1. Similarly, this sigma plus, which decays to proton and pi 0, or to, in a different mode, to neutron and pi plus, we can say that this particle should also have a baryon number +1, because P and N have baryon number +1, pions are 0, and baryon numbers need to be conserved. So this and these are new particles with baryon number +1, that's why they are baryons. So I call them baryons, but they are heavier baryons, heavier than proton and neutron. Similarly, this particle sigma 0, this is found to decay in lambda 0 and gamma. Lambda 0 is this particle, which is again baryon. Okay, so lambda 0 has a baryon number 1 as discussed earlier. Therefore, sigma 0 should also have baryon number 1, because since photon is a particle with 0 baryon number. Here, similarly, sigma minus decays to neutron and pion. So it will have baryon number 1. Okay. Similarly, this chi plus, their decay modes are given in this way, and you can check that since lambda 0 has a baryon number 1, these are also baryon. So all these particles, lambda, sigma, chi, have baryon numbers 1. And once you know the baryon number, their baryon number, then you can, and you know their masses, then you are we expect that we can write all the decay modes of these particles without looking at the experimental results, because we know in the decay modes, baryon number has to be conserved, lepton number has to be conserved. Only thing is that the decay mode should be energetically viable. For that, only thing is that these particles' masses has to be greater than the sum of the masses of the decay products. If we can ensure that, we can write the different possible decay modes of these particles. I have only written few possible decay modes of the particle. There are other possibilities I have not written, but whatever be the possibilities, baryon number should be conserved. Clear? Do you have any query about this? Any questions regarding this? Okay. Now this thing I mentioned, look at it, that all that baryons in the above list has their own antiparticles, which are not presented in the list. So in this table of heavier baryons, I have not written explicitly the antibaryons. Okay, but there is a separate list of that, but we don't need to write it here, because if I know the baryons, antibaryons have opposite quantum. We'll have quantum numbers minus of these values. Clear? And for heavier baryons, symbols like sigma plus and sigma minus, they do not represent particle-antiparticle pair, so that you don't get confused that these are antiparticles, because remember, they are not antiparticles, they have different masses. We just, to reduce the number of symbols, we used same kind of sigma symbol for these different particles, and we don't need to write their antiparticles for our discussion. Just remember that antiparticles are opposite sign. Yeah. So this was about our heavier baryons, the table we started with, these heavier baryons, that list. Let's come to this part, the heavier mesons. Let's see what are they. These are, table A is basically a list of particles observed experimentally. I am not telling explicitly in which experiment they are observed, but they are observed mostly in cosmic ray experiments, and later in detectors also, in nuclear reactors also. And there are this list of heavier mesons. They are denoted by K, eta, etc. And this K particle I discussed earlier in last class also, that there are two, K plus and K minus. K plus decays to this, K minus decays to this, and you can check that K plus and K plus have zero baryon number from this decay, because none of these products have any baryon number. So K plus should have zero baryon number. Similarly, K minus, and here, unlike the previous table A, K plus and K minus are antiparticles of each other. For the heavier meson particle list, I mentioned the particle and antiparticle on the same table explicitly. For heavier baryon particles, I have only mentioned the particles, not the antiparticles of these particles are mentioned here explicitly. There is a special reason for this, which we will understand soon. Okay, but This is the list of heavier mesons. There are other mesons, K0, K bar mesons. These are very important mesons. Their masses are like this. They are antiparticles of each other. So K0 has this set of decay modes. K0 bar also have same kinds of decay modes. And these are their lifetimes. And there are some more physics involved with this K0 particle. We will see, we will study specially particles like K mesons, particles like neutrinos. They are in some sense different from all other particles based on their some such properties which is not found in any natural particle, in any other particles. Okay, we will see that what is that. What is that? But for the time being, I am not entering into this. I am just mentioning here that they are just mesons. They have zero baryon number, as we can see from the decay products. None of the decay products are baryons, so all of them has zero baryon number. So the mother particle should also have zero baryon number. So for us, baryon number conservation is concerned. Okay, so we can see that for this part, this is not true. You see that B is 0 for all the K mesons, eta mesons, etc. So this line is not true. I will check correct. So all this particle B is 0. That's why they are named as mesons. Okay. So baryon number is 0 for all these particles. So what we have done so far, just recall, we have listed some heavier baryons and some heavier mesons. We have just listed it. And list their masses, list their modes of decay and their lifetime. And from their decay modes, we have shown that what baryon number assignment they get, and we have verified that these particles all they get baryon number 1, and these particles all of them get baryon number 0. That's why they are called meson, they are called baryons. Okay, so come back to this list again. So this is the list of heavier baryons and heavier mesons. So these particles are baryons, they are heavier baryons. Lighter baryons are nucleons. These particles are again mesons, both lepton number, baryon number 0, but they are not the lightest mesons. Lightest mesons are the pions. Clear? Now they have some, as I said, these particular particles, this set, these heavier baryons and some of this and these heavier mesons, this set, they exhibit some strange behaviors. Okay, so what is that strange behavior? If you are very intelligent and careful, if you look at the table, you may get some hint of that strange behavior. If you give a careful look at this table, but there is something more I need to show you to make this strange behavior more visible later, soon. Okay, so let's discuss, stop here for the time being and discuss something which will be helpful for revealing what is the strange behavior listed in this table A and table B. You just look at table A, they are just some decay products. These red particles, these red symbols means the new particles, the new heavier baryons. And here also the red particles means heavier mesons. The black particle means other particles, lighter baryons, lighter mesons, or leptons, or photons, whatever. But only these new particles, which I said that which exhibit strange behavior, they are marked red in this table. We will come back to this table later, but let's digress and discuss something interesting at this point. Just a minute. Okay, now I want to discuss something about the time scale of an interaction. Okay, so time scale of an interaction means basically the crudely the time when suppose when A and B are put together, then the time it takes to interact. Okay, that is the time scale of the interaction. Okay, so let's quantitatively define what is it. Okay, so let me discuss some points. So all processes, concentrate very carefully, all processes that represents particle interactions should be either decay or scattering. Okay, I told this several times earlier also. So there must be decay where there is one particular initial state and many particles at final state, or scattering where there are at least two particles in initial state and many particles in final state. Okay, so the general form of any kind of decay, any kind of interactions. Now, how fast a decay occurs, how fast a particle decay, how fast a decay occurs is quantitatively measured by a term called decay width or decay rate, which is denoted by this symbol. We will see the definition soon. And how fast a scattering occurs, that is quantitatively defined by a term called scattering cross section, and is denoted by the symbol sigma. I have defined this scattering cross section in your quantum mechanics 2 course. And there is the same scattering cross section. There is a measure, basically it's a measure of how fast a scattering occurs. Okay. Or in other words, how intensely a process occurs. That is a measure of the strength of the process or the fastness of the process, which is also related to the time scale of the process, whatever you call it. Okay. Now, scattering cross section can be total scattering cross section, and you know it can be differential scattering cross section. Differential scattering cross section means d sigma dE or d sigma d omega, or this double differential derivatives, where the rate of this reaction when you independently measure the individual energies and directions of the outgoing particles. Okay, so d sigma dE is the, if you measure, suppose for a particular energy E, suppose C is emitted with a particular energy E, then d sigma dE is the rate of this, gives you a measure of this rate of this process for that energy. Okay. Similarly, d sigma d omega is a number of interactions, rate of interactions when this particle C emits with a solid angle omega with respect to the incident direction of this particle A. Like that. Okay. So decay width and differential and scattering cross section are the two quantities which we use to measure the degree of fastness of these processes. Okay. So this decay width is defined in the following way, and most of you have known it in the context of radioactive decay. Okay, so decay width is basically, it is defined as the it is defined in this way: the probability that a single unstable entity will decay or will cease to exist or will get annihilated from nature. The probability that a single unstable entity will cease to exist after an interval of time that is proportional to the amount of time as well as proportional to the number of that particle present initially. Okay, so suppose you have an ensemble of n number of identical particles, and you check that after a time dt, the n number of particles disintegrates. Then dn should be proportional to, obviously proportional to n as well as on dt, because if you wait for more time, you will find more particles are disintegrating, and if you increase the number of ensembles, number of particles in the ensemble, then you will find that more particles are disintegrating. Yeah. So if you are 100 particles, you will see in 1 second 10 particles are disintegrating. If you have 1 crore particle, you will find more particles are disintegrating in that 1 second. Also, for a given number of particles, if you have 100 particles, you will find number of particles decaying in 1 second is more than number of particles decaying in half second. Okay, so time window and the number of particles initially present, dn is proportional to both of them, and that proportionality constant is called decay width. Yeah, it is a measure of how fast that particular particle decays. Okay, it's obviously because for any decay, dn is always proportional to dn and dt, but this proportionality constant is specific to a particular decay. Clear? And this minus sign corresponds to the fact that dn decreases, that n decreases as the decay happens. Here, this is so, and the solution to this is this. You know, this is the differential equation. It's a solution to this. So this lambda, which is the proportionality constant, appears as in the exponent, and you can check that if you want to have a physical interpretation of this, this gamma, then gamma, so 1 by gamma, if you put t equal to 1 by gamma, that means after a lapse of time, t equal to 1 by gamma, the number of particles decays and reduces to 1 by e of its initial fraction. Clear? So that this tau represents the lifetime of the particle. Lifetime is defined as the time in which the number of particles decays to an n number of particles decays to 1 by e times n number of particles, or a single particle has the probability 1 by e to decay to other particles. Okay, so that is the lifetime, or in other words, that is the inverse of this gamma, this proportionality constant. This gamma is a measure of this, how fast this decay happens. T is a measure of the time scale. Okay, the time, the lifetime of the particle. Suppose t is the lifetime of the particle. 1 by t means how fast the decay happens. In 1 second, how many particles decays? Clear? So this is the definition of decay width. And if you find a particle decaying into various channels, like I discussed in some class, that decay of tau leptons to many channels, I draw a tree, there are different branching ratios, there are different channels. So the total decay rate is equal to, must be the sum of all the decay rates in all different channels. Here is obvious, because total probability is sum of all the probabilities, and the total lifetime or time scale is 1 over the total thing. Clear? Is this clear? Is this definition of decay width clear? Decay width or decay rate, how it is defined? Hello? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now check carefully that in case where there are many different channels, like this channel, the K plus decay into these 3 different channels at least shown here. That means for every channel there is a decay rate, gamma 1, gamma 2, gamma 3, and total decay rate is gamma 1 plus gamma 2 plus gamma 3, and its lifetime, which is this, is 1 by gamma total. Now this branching ratio is this decay rate along branching ratio along a particular channel is the decay rate along that channel divided by the total decay rate, which is basically the probability that decay happens to that particular channel. That is the branching ratio. Yeah, it is obvious. And you can check that this dimension of this decay rate is obviously dimension of inverse of time. Okay, so it is the inverse of time, and also the dimension of this branching ratio is dimensionless. Okay, branching ratios are dimensionless. So decay rate measures the fastness of decay of a process, whose inverse measures the time scale of the decay, which is basically how much it takes for a system to decay, a single particle to decay. And that is basically the lifetime of that particle. Clear? An electron needs infinite time to decay. That means electron's lifetime is infinite. The electron does not decay. But for example, this particle here, K minus or K plus, 10 to the power minus 8 second is lifetime. That means once a K minus is produced somehow in nature, it will take this much time to decay. This is the time scale of this interaction. So this lifetime and time scale are same thing. Now, all these processes are decay. Now, if you have a scattering process, scattering, you measure the rate of that scattering process, time rate of occurrence of that scattering by a quantity called scattering cross section, which you can check that is elaborately defined in your quantum mechanics class. But let me discuss it very briefly. So if you consider this interaction A plus B going to C plus D plus dot dot, the system of incoming particles A and B, they constitute the initial state I, and the C plus D, they constitute the final state F. Okay, so our system goes from I to F. Now, if a packet of A particle comes and passes through another packet of B particle, so basically you are colliding two beams of A and B. Whenever you are colliding two beams of A and B, remember that the beams has a cross section. And cross section means beams have an area. How wide is the beam? Okay. Now, whenever two beams are colliding, the interaction becomes relevant only in the portion where the area in the overlapping region of the two beams. Okay. So if you clap using your both palms, both hands, then if this overlap area covers the full surface area of your hand in both hands, then if you apply some force, then the sound will be produced. It will be something. Now, if you use the same force, but you reduce the overlapping area. Okay, so you place in your right hand, half of your right hand and half of your left hand, palm. Okay, then the sound will be produced with the same force will be much reduced. Is it clear? So it depends on how much area you are, how much area of overlap is there. That is a, that you have to take into account while considering these interactions. Okay, and obviously, suppose Na and Nb are the number of A particles and number of B particles within that overlapping region. Suppose S is the overlapping region, then the total number of scattering happens must be proportional to Na and Nb and should be proportional, inversely proportional to the overlapping area. You can check this very obviously. Okay, if you look at this scattering picture. And this constant of proportionality is called the scattering cross section. This is the physical interpretation of scattering cross section. Okay, so you can, so this constant is now for a given S, for a given N, given B, if sigma is greater, that means for the same setup, if sigma is greater, that means number of scattering will be more. Clear? So, the sigma is a measure of scattering, the strength of the interaction. Or we call it scattering cross section, and you can obviously check from the definition that sigma has the dimension of area. S is the area. Area is the overlap area S. Okay. And you can check because Na, Nb, and Ns are just numbers. So sigma and S are of same dimension. And naturally, in normal high energy physics experiments of these particles, the unit we use is 1 barn. That is the effective unit. 1 barn is 10 to the power minus 24 centimeter. In terms of barn, we use this. Okay. Clear? So the basic point here is experimentally we can measure the rate of occurrence of any interaction, whether it is a decay or whether it is a scattering. For decay, we call it decay width for scattering, we call it scattering cross section. Okay, there are some other things I have written here, but let's discuss it. I mean, you can read it. I am not discussing it here. So the thing is, experimentally, we are powered enough to measure the time scale of any interaction by measuring cross section or decay width. Clear? So look at this. The decay width of a decay and the cross section of a scattering are basically give a measure of time scale of occurrence of the process, how long it takes to just occur the process, how long it, basically crudely speaking, how long it takes to change from initial state to final state. Okay, that is the time scale. Now, the most important observation and most prominent observations, I don't know whether you have observed it so far from the very list of list of all particles that I have given to you on the very first day. There are lifetimes of different particles. If you check that numbers, you will find that that was only the decay lifetimes. Anyway, for any other scattering, that list was not with you. Whatever be the natural processes, whatever be the, I mean, if you measure the decay rates of or the scattering cross sections of all the processes, the thing you will find is that the time scale of all processes that happen in nature can be grouped into 3 categories based on their values, because the time scale can be either in this range or in this range or in this range. These are 3 widely separated ranges. There are no values in between this. So if there is a time scale, there is a time axis, say 10 to the power minus small 24 second to say 10 to the power minus say 6 second. Okay, so you will find that there are 3 regions here. One region is this region, one region is this region, one region is this. This is an experimental observation, but very profound experimental observation, that if you measure the time scale of occurrence of any of the natural processes that happen, natural means any processes that happen in nature, their time scale must fall either in this limit 10 to the power minus, either below 10 to the power minus 24 to minus 20, either this range, or in this range minus 7 to 10, or in this range minus 16 to 17. And there is a 3 orders of magnitude gap here. There are no particles here, no processes whose time scales of occurrence are there. Okay, this is a pattern seen in the values of the time scales of all these particles, all these interactions, different interactions. Do you understand this? What do you mean? What I just said about this observed value of time scale?
Time scale is when we produce the particle on shell, right?
Yes, on shell means it's an observed particle. When you use observed particle. So all these particles we discuss here are on shell particles, observed particles.
Okay.
All observed particles are on shell particles. Okay, so for other students, you will gradually learn in quantum field theory course what is the on shell particle is. On shell particle means which satisfies the energy momentum relation is square equal to b square plus m square. Okay, there are other particles which does not satisfy. We call it off shell or virtual particles, which are not seen in these, which are not observed, but whose existence are inferred. I mean, whose existence are required in the model for your understanding. Those are different particles. Okay, Shivam, but in this course, whatever particle, since I am telling about observed particles only, all particles are on shell particles. all these such particles, their measured lifetimes lie in either of these three distinct, well-separated regions. And this is not a random thing. Okay. Yeah. That means
Yes.
either this is a profound, very profound, if you can feel it, this is a very profound discovery. This tells you that all processes that happen in nature, they can occur in three different degrees of fastness. Yeah, one is very slow, whose time scale fall in this region. Though I am calling it slow with relative to this, with respect to humans, our psychological time, this is a very short, this is very fast. But with respect to other three, it is very slow. Yeah. So this is a slow rate process. If in a time scale, this we call a moderate rate process because it is faster than this slower one and slower than the other extreme. And this is 10 to the power minus 20 to 24 seconds. This is too fast. Okay, so there are three different degrees of fastness of interacting processes. This is the first time I am talking about these degrees of fastness of these processes. In previous classes, I have not told you explicitly about this. I only showed you the time scale for decay zone. Okay. Now, the processes which are very slow, the general term for this is weak, because we call this weak process because they are slow. Okay, the processes take much time, so in that sense they are weak. The processes which are too fast, that is, they occur very strongly. But later, these are the names. Weak and strong is based on this degree of fastness. But like baryon number, lepton number, this modern definition of weak and strong are completely different. Though this degree of fastness, they respect these terminologies. So these interactions are called weak interactions. These interactions are called strong interactions. The moderate interactions, which is a different kind of interactions from strong and weak, and we will call it electromagnetic interaction, and we will gradually see why we call it electromagnetic, where is its connection with electricity and magnetism. But so this is an experimental discovery that all the interactions between elementary particles can be classified into three categories. They either interact weakly or electromagnetically or strongly. Clear? Yes. Any question?
Are we able to observe all of these three kind of particles when we produce it and they eventually decay before they eventually decay?
We'll see gradually. Because for some particles will decay according to this interaction, some other particles will decay according to the other. We'll gradually see this. Okay. But this is just because this scheme, the way we are learning the subject, just looking at the experimental data, we are giving the experimental data the first priority, and from that we extract whatever we can extract using the simple basic principles of physics. Okay, so it's experimental data tells us that there are three different ranges of time scales. That means there are three different degrees of fastness of these interactions, and we call them weak, strong, and moderate. And for moderate, since we know from now that moderate interactions are basically due to electromagnetic kind of interaction, so you can use the term electromagnetic interaction for the timing without knowing its meaning, implications. Yeah. So there are three kinds of interactions in nature: interaction between elementary particles, weak, electromagnetic, and strong. Yeah. There is a fourth kind of interactions between all particles, which is very obvious, which is gravity. Yeah, because gravity is the interaction which is equivalent to the word existence. If anything has any matter or energy, if anything has existence, it will experience gravity. Okay. Now, because you know Einstein's equation in general relativity, and matter experiences gravity by Newton's laws of motion. Even light experiences gravity by Einstein's theory of relativity. So even matter and light, even though it doesn't have any mass, they are affected by gravity. So gravitational interaction is there, but we will show you sometime for elementary particles, their mass and rest mass energies are so small that their gravitational interaction between them is negligible compared to this three kind of interaction. Suppose if you take two electrons and somehow you know how to calculate these three kind of interaction between two electrons. Weak, electromagnetic, strong, if it exists, I don't know, it will not exist. But that will be much higher. Even the weak interaction will be much higher than gravitational interaction because electron mass is too low. Gravitational interaction between electrons or fundamental particles can never be registered in the laboratory. They are so low. Okay, they are beyond detection. But these interactions are registered in the laboratory. That's why I can write it in this way. Clear? Any questions? Hello. So there are three types of interactions in nature. Let's come back to this table again. This is table A and table B. I put it here again, which was there in my previous slides. I would come back to these tables again, where I have written the same equations. There's decay of heavier baryons and the decay of heavier mesons. Okay. Now, the decay lifetimes are given. They are the time scales of the interaction. Okay. Now check this. Check very carefully this, that gamma 0, its time scale is this. So where it falls in this limit. Okay. And these boundaries are not very sharp. It may be 10 to the power 10, maybe in some cases 10 to the power minus 11. Okay. To extreme cases, it may be 10 to the power minus 12, but it will not reach this. It is still 3-4 orders of magnitude less. There is a wide gap between these two. Okay. So these numbers are, I mean, some rough, hazy numbers. Okay. The boundaries are hazy, but the gap is very sharp. The gap is very wide. Okay. So look at this. So 10 to the power minus 10, minus 16, 17, and above minus 20, 24. Okay. Weak, electromagnetic, strong. Three different time scales of interactions. And look at the heavier baryons, their time scales. Look at this. So this is one special. What do you see from this first table? What do you see from this first table? First table shows you that this particle has somehow a different scale of interactions. Clear? Whether these particles have different scales. So we say that gamma 0, sorry, this is lambda 0 decays by weak interaction because its time scale is like this. Sigma plus decays by weak interaction because its time scale is like this. Sigma plus decays by, sigma 0 decays by this interaction. This is it. I mean, there is a, though I have written minus, I don't know what is minus, it may be minus 19. Actually, it falls in this region. Is not in this region. Okay, so you can call it minus 21 to 24 and bring it to 19 because I may be wrong here. Anyway, so this is basically an electromagnetic decay. So this particle, so this is different from this. This is an electromagnetic decay. So this particle has a different way of decaying. Clear? Now, you don't, okay. Now come to these particles also. Look at this. These mesons, they decay, K mesons decay weakly. This decay weakly. This decay weakly. This decay has a decay lifetime, which is electromagnetic again. Okay. Here, these modes I have not written. I have not written this lifetime is for this mode. For this decay modes I have not written because they are possible because of lepton number, baryon number conservations, but these decays will have lifetimes around this value. That means given an eta, it tends to decay into 2 photons by electromagnetic interaction much faster. So before it gets times to decay into these channels, it will all decay along this channel because this channel is open for this. Okay. So this is faster. So there are very crucial small things to observe in this list. Yeah. So these particles can decay either by weak interaction. Mostly some particles decay by electromagnetic interaction. And if you have a careful look, the particles which decay by electromagnetic interactions carry a gamma as a product. There, do you see? That means in any interaction where there is a gamma, the one product is gamma or photon, that interaction time scale is in the moderate range, that is electromagnetic interaction. Clear? Otherwise, other particles, okay, where there is interaction product is not gamma, these other red particles which are heavier baryons or heavier mesons, they always decay by weak interaction. No particle has a lifetime equal to 10 to the power minus 23 or 24 seconds in this scale, because of which we can say that none of these particles decay by strong interactions. Clear? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now come to the third part, because all these, so if you carefully look at table 1 and 2, this table says that these red particles of which we are discussing, which I told that these red colored symbol particles have some special or some strange behaviors. So one of these strange behavior is that these red colored particles lifetime or time scale of decay is governed by weak interaction. In some extreme cases by electromagnetic interaction where gamma is emitted with it, but not by strong interaction. Do you follow this statement from this table? Because I will gradually list these statements in a more concise way, then it will be clear in next class. But for today's class, actually, this is the last slide of today's class. I tend to stop early. Okay, but just try to understand these two tables. There is something more to these tables, but for this, these tables say that decay modes of heavier baryons and heavier mesons, and they say that all these heavier baryons and heavier mesons listed at least in this table decay by weak interaction. In some cases, they prefer to decay by electromagnetic interaction, but that is that decay is always associated with an emission of photon. Clear? Okay.
Does this correspond to any conservation law?
Okay, I'll come to that.
They are not getting to.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I will come to that. Yes, it corresponds to some, not some conservation law, some non-conservation law. I will come to that. It's very interesting. Now, there is a third table I am listing here. Third table is the table I discussed here so far are the tables of heavier baryons and heavier mesons decaying. I have not written in any table or any reaction where they are produced. Though in some reactions here, this baryon is produced, this baryon is produced, this baryon is produced, but that too from decay of a heavier baryon. Okay. Now, this is a very popular or widely used reaction in accelerators, where you accelerate one beam of proton and another beam of pion. Okay. You can also accelerate one beam of proton and another beam of antiproton. That is also true, viable. But protons and pions, if you accelerate it and collide, that means you have with very high energy. That means you have very high energy access from which new particles can be produced, and you observe this along with other productions. These productions are also there. These red particles, that heavier baryons. So I only picked up those particular channels where these red particles, which are heavier baryons other than proton neutron and heavier mesons other than pions, they are produced from proton pion collision. And you observe that this is the strange thing. When the red particles are decaying, they decay by weak interaction. When they are produced, they produce by strong interactions. Because you measure the cross sections of this interaction, and from this cross section you estimate the time scale of happening of that interaction. You find that time scale is of the order of this second. Clear? That means these particles, heavier mesons and heavier, both of them. One should be heavier baryons. There are many mistakes. Heavier mesons and heavier baryons, which are produced in the production channel, they are produced with this time scale. Clear? That means they are produced by strong interaction. Heavier mesons and heavier baryons listed here marked by red symbols. They are produced in strong interaction. They decays by weak interaction in general, in some extreme cases by electromagnetic interactions as well. Clear? This statement is clear? From table
Yes,
A,
sir.
table B, table C. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Now come to the last table of today.
Sir,
Yes, sir, ma'am. Yeah.
sir, here the reaction happening, the time scale is for product particles as well as for the reactant particles.
Yes. So time scale is the times. It is not the lifetime. It is a scattering process. Scattering process, there is no lifetime. Scattering process, actually what we measure is the cross section. Cross section means how fast this scattering happens, the rate of that reaction happening. Rate of this reaction happening. From that rate of the reaction, you can estimate what is the time scale of this reaction. What is the time required for one reaction to happen, to be speaking. You can estimate that. Okay, I have not told you the prescription how to evaluate the time scale from the value of cross section. That is a bit complicated, but take this as we can do this. We can measure how long it takes for this initial state I to transfer into this final state. And that time is 10 to the power minus 23 seconds. And that is inversely related to the measured cross section of this process, because cross section measures the rate of a reaction. Yeah. Rate of a reaction is always inversely proportional to time scale of any reaction. Yeah. Like.
Okay, sir. Okay,
It is
okay.
like.
So it is not related.
Yeah.
It is not related with the lifetime of the particles. It is just the interaction.
It is not the it is just interaction time. It is not the lifetime of the particles, because K sigma has different lifetimes. For decay only, the time scale is equal to the lifetime. This decay process, or the decay process, lifetime and the time scale of happening this interaction, they are exactly equal concepts. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Okay.
But for these processes, a process cannot have a lifetime. A process has a time scale. Individual particles have different lifetimes listed here. But this process as a whole has a time scale this. And this time scale falls in this strong in 2 first region. Clear? That means these particles decay by strong interaction. So this is the first strange feature of this heavy mesons and heavy baryons, that they are produced by strong interaction, they decay by weak interaction, in some cases by electromagnetic interaction. Clear? Now comes
Yes, sir.
the further more interesting point. These processes listed below are not observed in nature, though baryon number, lepton number, charge are conserved here. You can check. You can check that baryon number is conserved here. You can check that lepton number is conserved here. You can check that charge is also conserved here. And you have to believe me that these reactions do not happen in nature. You can check in the laboratory. You can't produce from PP, proton pion collision, these particles. What does that mean? So everything up to before we up to this, everything baryon number, lepton number, charge, etc., seem to be good quantum numbers, representing, clearly, correctly stating the occurrence or non-occurrence of any reactions. But the moment we see that non-observation, okay, there are some feel for a need for a new quantum number. Okay. Now look at this very carefully. If I write a neutron here, I delete this, sorry, suppose pi 0 plus sigma, this delta 0, I delete it and write a neutron here, then this reaction will happen. Baryon number, lepton number, etc. are conserved. But if I erase the neutron and write a heavier baryon, yeah, this reaction will not happen. In other words, if you again look carefully, you can check this table C and table D. Just a minute. Let me clear these things up, clear the mess. If you look at this table C and D, you can check that these reactions do not happen, means these particles, these red particles, you can also say it like this way. These red particle means heavier baryons and heavier mesons. When they are produced, they are always produced in pairs. Here, when they are produced, they are always produced in pairs. They are never produced singly. Is it clear? This red is a special character. They are heavier baryons and heavier mesons. Pions and nucleons are not included in that set. Here, so red is the set of heavier baryons and heavier mesons. Like I mentioned here, red, this set. Okay, this set. To be specific, this set, heavier baryons, heavier mesons. This set. So all these red particles of this set, you can check that they are always produced in pairs, but they can never be produced singly. Here, in any interaction, you can say, okay, if you go back to this interaction, you can check that red particles are produced singly. Here, in production, there is only one red particle, but they are produced from another red particle. So at least you can say that whenever some if there is red particles are always involved in pairs, with the pair is between one particle at initial state and one at final state. So at least 2 red particles should be there. So even if you this okay, so let me tell it in this way. Even if there are some interactions from the decay channels appears to have singly produced red particles, but they are produced from a red particle at the initial state. But these red particles are produced singly, are not produced singly. There are no red particles at the initial state, and those processes are not allowed. In other words, that means if I assign a quantum number in such a way that, suppose for k plus, for which k plus, this quantum number, say S is a new quantum number. S is suppose 1 for k plus and -1 for sigma minus. Okay. And I say that S should be conserved. Then I can say that in this process S is conserved. Here, it's clear. If these pairs of these 2 pairs, I give one pair a value of positive S and other pair just opposite value, then I can say S is conserved in this reaction. Similarly, for this pair, suppose I give S1 to this particle and -1 to this particle, then I can call this, in this process S is conserved. And this process does not happen in nature because S is not conserved, because only red particles, has a non-zero value of S. Here only red particles have non-zero S, others have 0 S. So in this process S is not conserved. So we can explain in that way that S is conserved here, S is not conserved here. That's so this process are not occurring, this process are occurring. Is it clear? If I do it this way, if I introduce a new quantum number S in such a way that and assign them their values in a way that each of these pairs are opposite pairs of values of S, then I can conserve S for these interactions. Automatically S will not be conserved for these interactions. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
And that will guarantee, and that will tell you that is consistent with our scheme that all quantum numbers should be conserved for all processes that happen in nature, and this process happens in nature. For this it will be conserved, and for this process S will not be conserved, and because this is not happening. Now the problem comes if you come back to these channels. This process again happen in nature, but only contains one red particle which carries the value S. Because I assign S only to these red particles to make this process happen and to make this process non-S conserving process. Only red particles got the value of S. If I do it in this way, so red particles now have the value S, but in this processes there is no red particles, but this process still happen. So there is a conflict here. Do you understand the conflict?
Yes, sir.
Then, okay, so S is a very strange kind of quantum number. It says, so what should I do? Should I keep S as a quantum number or look for something more? I mean, something more that, but you can check that in no way you can explain all these 4 tables. There's only one way to introduce. If you at least introduce a quantum number, this quantum numbers has to be conserved for these processes. It will not be conserved for these processes. But this processes also, S will not be conserved, but this process happen in nature, which violates our scheme of as quantum number assignment. Okay, that all natural occurring processes quantum number should be conserved. Then you just relax that criteria for S but when you relax something, you also gain something. So you gain that power of S to state the interactions in this way. Now let's see what this let's concentrate on my statement, what I am going to make. Now suppose I said these are strong interactions, okay? All of them have this time scales, and these are weak interactions, okay? All of this have this time. So I say S is a quantum number which is conserved for strong interaction, but not conserved for weak interaction. Yeah? If I put it in this way, S is such a quantum number which is different from all other quantum numbers in the sense that all other quantum numbers has to be conserved with all interactions that happen in nature. But S is such a quantum number which is conserved only for strong interaction, but not for weak interaction. If I make this statement, then I can verify that this statement is true according to my S assignments for these particles. Is it clear? S is a quantum number which is conserved for strong interactions, and this process has strong interactions, and it is conserved. We declare it, therefore it happens. It is not, this is also a, and this processor is not conserved. Okay. In this processes, it is not conserved, but still it is happening. That means S is not conserved for weak interaction. That statement is valid. So S is a special quantum number which is not exact, but it is differentiating two different kinds of interactions, strong and weak, by dictating that S will be conserved for strong interaction and it will not conserve for weak interaction. So in a way, we now introducing a new quantum number which differentiate, not only which doesn't actually differentiate what will happen and what will not happen. What will happen and what will not happen is dictated by baryon numbers, lepton numbers, charges, etc. S dictates that. Together, it also dictates in which, I mean, the nature of the interaction. It dictates that in strong interaction, it will always remain conserved. In other interactions, it will not remain conserved. In weak interactions, it will not remain conserved. Here, we will discuss this more in next class. I just give you an idea of it. That's why I am said that we need to continue. This is just need for a new quantum number. Yes, could ask.
I don't know. I think it feels like a little bit, it seems like a ad hoc method, because we know that
Yes.
these processes exist, and
Yes,
then we
yes.
assign a quantum number to it to just prove
See,
that, yes, this thing
assignment of
happens.
quantum numbers are only ad hoc. Assignments
Yeah.
of these quantum numbers are only on the ad hoc basis. In such a way, now if it fits all my statements about this quantum number, now you can forget about all this property. You did not remember the whole list of interactions. You just remember this simple laws that in any interaction, baryon number, lepton number, etc. conserved. S is conserved in strong, not in weak. And you remember the list of all particles, value of this quantum numbers. So this is only an ad hoc introduction. But with this ad hoc introduction, with this ad hoc introduction, you try to realize the symmetry or pattern in the data set of the all particles. Otherwise, how will you understand that data? In terms of some numbers, you are ultimately extracting the symmetries, expressing the symmetries in terms of some numbers which were introduced ad hoc, on the ad hoc basis only. But once your ad hoc introductions gives correct predictions for all processes that happen in nature, that prediction, because seeing all the processes, you improvise the introduction of these numbers. Now you feel that, now you verify it for newly discovered processes, and you recorrect or re-strengthen your choices. This is based on that. Okay. Now, so that at the end of the day, whenever you see, you don't think a particle as something, just you can think of particle just as a collection of a number set. A particle is basically a collection of a number L, comma B, comma Q, comma spin, comma S, like that. It's just realize the particle in terms of that, so that you can any interactions can be realized in terms of conservation of these quantum numbers. Okay, and you introduce these quantum numbers on the ad hoc basis only. Clear?
Okay, sir.
The electron
Is
number
there any
barrier.
other?
Yeah.
Is there any other way to, I mean, generate quantum numbers from that manifests quantum number from a way, rather
Theoretically.
intrinsic properties of the
So
particles?
you mean theoretically?
Yes, theoretically. Yes.
Yeah, theoretically many quantum numbers will appear, but you have to map those quantum numbers with your ad hoc quantum numbers you introduced based on the particles if you want to match your theory with the experiment. Yeah, but that match may not be straightforward. They're clear. For example,
Okay.
the spin quantum number, that spin quantum number was introduced theoretically. Spin. A hub for electron, hub for that. That directly comes, I mean, that directly comes from theory. Okay, you just introduce this. You can independently measure the spin also and check that, and that your spin measurement is directly taken care in this theory by the spin operator. But it is very difficult to construct a electron number operator in theory. But the point is that you can, I don't know how to do that, but the point is that whatever theory you do and whatever quantum numbers that your theory it will emerge from your theory, those quantum numbers, ultimately what you have to do, ultimately you have to match your theory with the experimental result to get some values of the parameters of your theory, right? This is how theory goes. You develop a theory, and if you want to match some experimental result, there must be some unknown parameters in the theory which you have to fit so that your experimental data matches with theory. And those unknown parameters should connect your theoretical quantum numbers with these ad hoc basis quantum numbers.
Okay, that clarifies a little bit. Maybe I can.
So what is your question? Do you ask?
Just
do you
like
ask,
we.
just
Hello?
like hello? Are you asking? Hello? Are you asking
Yes, sir.
that?
Yes, sir.
Are you asking that whether can I calculate theoretically the electron number of a particle?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like we calculate the spin quantum number from a really from introducing the spin of the particle, or
Yes.
magnetic quantum number. Like that, can we produce?
No.
Can we
No.
produce lepton
No.
number and other things?
No. Not directly.
Okay.
You can, in a theory, some quantum in some form quantum numbers may appear. Yeah, but
Okay.
those quantum numbers may be linked to these quantum numbers, lepton numbers, baryon numbers, but not in a very straightforward way, because you have a freedom to assign this quantum number. I just this as a quantum number assignments, I just put by hand Le equal to 1, and then
Yes.
by looking at these interactions, I am putting the quantum numbers to other particles. There is some freedom here, but the quantum number assignment somehow captures in them the different interactions in them, because these interactions will happen, these interactions will not happen. So when you theoretically encounter that part which deals with which kind of interactions are allowed theoretically, that when you theoretically deal with that part, then the connection to this kind of quantum numbers will come. But it is not that straightforward that you can directly calculate. There is a formula for calculating lepton number in terms of fields in field theory. You can't calculate that directly. You can calculate many things from which you can relate to the quantum number in some complicated way, that there may not be any obvious analytic expression for that. And there must be some degeneracy in that also, because lepton number to some extent ad hoc. Initialization, there is a freedom in initialization. But the structure in the lepton number, so what are the different lepton numbers? The different particles get different lepton number assignments, but in that assignments, different particles have some zero values of lepton numbers, some non-zero values. But what is encapsulated in those values is basically the nature of their interactions. In theoretically, we deal with this in a completely different way. And in theoretically also, we have to give that input experimentally only. Okay, ultimately, when we calculate that electron, when we want to calculate the decay width of proton going to electron plus gamma, theoretically, if you want to calculate, your theory will give you some result, but with some parameters. Experiment tells you that decay width should be 0 because this decay doesn't happen. Clear? Now you have to, that your theory should give you the experimental result correctly. There are some unknown parameters in the theory which you have to fix by looking at the data. And now data means, when you see all the particles, your data means the set of lepton numbers. Your set of lepton numbers or baryon numbers or any quantum number, the whole set is a representative set of data. It's a new form of data. You have to match your theory with this data. It is not that you calculate your data directly from it. There are many parameters in your theory which will get some values based on this data, which is represented in the form of quantum numbers, lepton numbers, baryon numbers. Because whenever you have a theory, whatever theory you build, there must be many parameters in the theory which you can't calculate based on that theory. Yeah, a theory has some unknown parameters, which when you connect that theory with some experimental result, you want this theory to explain this result, then some parameters should have acquired some parameters should have some value so that that theory gets explained. Now, when you are matching this experimental result with this theory, these parameters of your theory should be matched with the experimental data. And in your case of particles, the experimental data is just the list of lepton numbers, baryon numbers. We are rephrasing all the experimental data in terms of some baryon numbers, lepton numbers, and their conservation laws. It is not that we can calculate it directly from theory. Is it clear? You cannot calculate the mass of an electron from any theory. Mass of an electron appears as a parameter in your theory. You match the theory with the experiment. Experiment measures something about electron mass, then that parameter gets connected. Electron mass is a simple thing. It is like in your field theory, in the quantum field theory course, what you will ultimately calculate basically the time scales or the decay width or scattering cross sections in terms of the field. In terms of various entities like fields, which inside it there are many parameters: mass of the field, coupling of the field, etc. Those parameters you have to find out by matching this result with experiment. When you say the experimental, a part of the experimental results are the lepton number assignments itself. That is your experiment. That you have to match with theory. It is not that you directly calculate it. Okay, once you have done this matching, then you can predict that, okay, for this new particle, this should be the lepton number. But that is at the end of this day, once your theory is firmly established. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I will discuss this more, on strangeness, but This S quantum number, which I was just introduced, is called strangeness. So next time I will discuss it in a great detail. Okay. So actually I will send this file sometime tonight. I mean, after 10 o'clock. I have to correct many things. Okay. There are many errors I find it here. Clear? Okay. Any questions? Oh, someone asked a question in chat. I just, sir, the degrees of firstness correspond to the same order as we know the force is weaker. Yes. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So if you have any questions, you can ask me in this question. You can send me a mail in that Inside Physics thread. If you have any physics question regarding this, I will reply. Okay. Thank you. So my next class will be on Monday or okay, Monday. Thank you.